I really, really like baseball. I like baseball so much that I not only like watch it on TV and follow the Angels, of course, but I donate my time to coach Little League for little kids. So not only do I work with little kids, but now I coach little kids in a couple games a week. And if you've ever been to a Little League game, you know what that's like. We played one yesterday. We played 4 innings, and it took us 2 hours to get through the 4 innings. Okay? And it is just quite the experience, let me tell you. But one thing that I've learned from sports is that I struggle. I have a struggle going on in my life right now, and it's this idea that it's really hard for me to admit that I'm just plain wrong about something. It's really hard for me to admit that, and I learned that because I've always struggled with when an official makes a call, whether it's in a football game on TV or in a baseball game on TV or in a baseball game I was playing in or in a baseball game that I'm coaching in. If I don't agree with that call, it's really hard for me to go, he probably got it right because, of course, he got it wrong because I got it right, right? That's kind of the way that works. And so as I think about this and I look around this room, I have to think, I can't be the only person in here who has that problem, right? Who struggles with that, who has that, issue going on in their life. And so nobody really wants to be wrong, whether it comes to sports or, shall we say, politics, government. Nobody really wants to be wrong about that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to think that their views about marriage are wrong. Nobody wants to think that the things they put in their mind, the music they listen to, the movies they watch, the podcasts that they listen to are wrong, that they communicate poor ideas. Nobody wants to think that their views about weapons are wrong. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. You don't want to think that your opinion is wrong because you want to be right. Right? Nobody wants to think that their view on the sanctity of human life is wrong. We all kind of have this struggle in some way. And the funny thing about the story that we're going to be moving into today, as it comes from Scripture, is that there are some characters in this story who desperately wanted to be right. And they so wanted to be right that they actually missed the entire point of what was going on around them. Right? And as we're going to learn, these people were not that much different from you and me. Okay? You see, we oftentimes just walk around with this deep-seated need to be validated for having the right opinion, that we let this compulsion that we have become something that's no longer helpful, right? It's merely a distraction that keeps us from impacting the world we live in because we just can't get away from the fact that we have to be right, right? We get so wrapped up in the culture and in the climate that we forget that it's important, and we miss opportunities to make changes in the arenas of our life that really matter, right? Today, we're looking at a story, and as I mentioned earlier, there's a people group in this story that, again, like you and me, got so caught up in the culture of right and wrong that they missed a beautiful message that was being presented to them, and even when it was right in front of their face, they missed it. So in Mark 15, which is that scripture that Kimmy read for us this morning, what we have going on here is this is part of the crucifixion story for Christ. This is part of him enduring the revulsion of his own people, the torture at the hands of the Romans, and the execution at the hands of the Romans. This is part of him carrying his cross partway up the hill to Golgotha until he eventually just couldn't do it anymore, and they had to pull a man named Simon to pick it up and carry it for him. Too weak to carry his own execution device, Jesus trudged up the hill, and finally at the top, he was nailed to the cross and forced to endure ridicule from both sets of people who were watching. Roman soldiers gambled for his clothes, and the Jewish religious leaders shouted insults at him. And with nowhere else to turn, Jesus shouts out to God in a moment of complete and utter despair. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me?" The people were so wrapped up in it that they didn't even understand who Jesus was calling out to. And the text also states, and in other gospels we find, correlation of this, that there were some pretty interesting scientific anomalies that took place, like the sky went completely dark and a great earthquake happened, just out of the blue, right? And so as we look at this story, we've got to kind of see that there's some stuff going on, but there's really three things that I want you to pay attention to, okay? So if you've been watching the video, the video series that we've been going through, whether you're in a small group or in a Sunday school class or whatever it is, you know that if you watch the video this week, the guy talks a lot about sin. He uses this in reference to he uses this passage to bring up the point that Christians need to be willing to deal with the sin in their life, because that's what Jesus was here for. He was here to take away sin, and that's true. We're going to run off on a little segue today, and we're ultimately going to come back to that. But what we're going to start with, again, is that there are three worldviews in this passage, and I want you to see what each one of them is. The first one is the worldview of the Jewish people, right? Their words and interactions are so important to us because many of us who call ourselves Christians, despite our best efforts, often approach situations with the same attitude that these people approached Jesus. In this moment, the Jews were so concerned with proving who Jesus was not that they couldn't pay attention to who he was. They were so concerned with proving who Jesus was not that they simply could not pay attention to who he was. They were so set on proving that Jesus was a phony that they misunderstood him calling out to God. They missed the entire point of his message. And they were willing to sacrifice the very code that they were supposed to live their life by in order to see him die. They went to some pretty extreme lengths, especially to just maintain some comfort, influence, and to prove their point. They were so set on making Jesus look bad, to prove that Jesus was wrong, that they missed the whole point to begin with. Had they been following their code that I've been talking about, which would be the fancy word for it's the Shema, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, they would have seen that God was standing right in front of them. They would have seen that God was right in front of them. Right? Instead of committing murder, they would have, at the very least, learned some new ideas about relating to God and serving the surrounding community. Number two is the worldview of Jesus. This part's important for us because this is kind of where the central message of this text lives, right? And so if you don't listen to anything else I say today, here's the part I want you to catch. Jesus willingly embraced separation from God so that all people might have the opportunity to know God. Jesus willingly embraced separation from God so that all people might have the opportunity to know God. So one of the things that I most like about Jesus, and I think a lot of people like about him, is that he didn't always feel the need to preach that his views were right. He simply let his actions and his ability to speak into people's lives and minister to people speak loud enough and prove that he was right. So he didn't just go around saying, I'm right, I have this all figured out. He showed people he had it figured out. He showed people that he understood that they were struggling. He showed people who were in pain that he understood pain. Right? Very, very contrary to what we experience now and very contrary to what religious leaders did back in that day. Jesus let his love for God and his compassion for all people reveal the truth. From the time in the temple as a little boy to the moment where he took his last breath, Jesus expressed through his life his deep connection to the Father and his deep desire to see compassion for all people. He embraced that fate. He embraced the cross because it was the will of his Father in heaven. And it was the only way that he could show the true extent of God's compassion for us. You see, in his final moments, Jesus endured separation from God so that even the Jews and the Romans who mocked, tortured, and executed him might have the opportunity to know God. Worldview number 3 is that of the Roman soldier after Jesus died. So at the end of the story, we see that there's this Roman soldier who, having witnessed everything, comes to the conclusion, and he shares his conclusion with one simple sentence. Truly, this man was the Son of God. Truly, this man was the Son of God. This is my favorite part of the whole story, because the reality of this man is that he's pretty much a neutral. So he's there to earn his paycheck. He's there to follow orders. He's there to basically be a soldier, right? He doesn't have any investment in this. He doesn't have any skin in the game. He's just there observing, seeing. He might have been one of the guys that was gambling for Jesus' clothes. The text doesn't really tell us that. He might have been one of the guys that had punched Jesus and kicked him and did some different things to him. But again, we don't know. The text doesn't tell us that. But what we do know is that he's a Roman. He's a Roman soldier, okay? And he's neutral. And so in spite of that, he's seeing these two worldviews come together and collide. The Jewish religious leaders and Jesus. And at the end of that collision, the conclusion that he comes to is that Jesus was exactly who he said he was. His honest observation led him to that conclusion. It didn't take someone preaching an answer to him. It didn't take someone calling out the injustice that was being perpetrated by him to help him see the light. It took someone who was so secure in their beliefs that they were willing to sacrifice everything to see those beliefs come to fruition. That's what it took to impact his life and to change his mind. And so you see, the soldier witnessed two, again, passionate worldviews collide and ended up choosing the one that was backed by innocent and consistent action, not the one that was motivated to prove the other wrong. So we've got these things and these three observations of three different characters with three probably very different outlooks on life. And we're left now with this question of now what? What does this mean for us? How do we move forward from this? And so what I really want to draw your attention to and what I want you to think about now is what your worldview is. Right? What is your worldview as it pertains to government, politics, the country, the bounds by which God has given men to interact, right? What is your worldview on marriage? What's your worldview on what you're putting into your mind by what you listen to, what you absorb, what you read? What's your view on the sanctity of human life? Right? All of these things are important. And they're all ultimately going to bring us to a place where we have a realization that our worldview can either help people know God or keep people from knowing God. Our worldview can either help us to know God or keep us from knowing God. Right? So as I was kind of processing this idea, there are three worldviews that I see most often in the world around us today. First one we're going to talk about is the blower, okay? And I call it the blower because if anybody knows what a leaf blower is, it kind of works like that. It's just this stream of air that comes straight at your face. It doesn't relent. It doesn't stop. It's just there, okay? We could also classify these people as the people that seem to think they're right all the time. They're convinced they're right. That's actually what happened to me. I had an encounter with one of those, and they blew the hair off my head, right? The second one that we're going to talk about is the shrugger, okay? And I call it the shrugger because the shrugger kind of has this opinion of they don't have one. Whatever works, it's kind of cool, whatever. I go up to the kids at youth group sometimes and ask them about something. They'll say, I don't know, whatever, man. That's kind of where we get that one from. Okay, number 3 is called the hopper. And it's called the hopper because these people change their opinions frequently. They go from here to here to here to here to here to here to here. They're all over the place, right? They're open to interpretation. So all 3 of these categories ultimately have their benefits and their faults. We could see value in each of them. But the reality is that we have got to be able to look at how we perceive our worldview and examine, again, how is it helping us to connect with God? Is it keeping us from connecting with God? Or how is it helping others connect with God? Or is it keeping others from connecting with God? Right? So let's talk about number 1. Let's talk about the blower here for a second. So like I said, these people are often convinced that they're right. Okay? There isn't anything that they miss. And so in our story, the reality is that this is the category that these Pharisees fall into, right? They were so convinced, so consumed that they were right, that they ultimately missed that God was standing in front of them. And so the Pharisees in our story were missing out on truth that was right in front of them. And so that begs the question for us. If we fall into this group of people, if we are so convinced that we are right and that everybody else is wrong, isn't there even a slight chance that we're missing just one speck of truth from our worldview? Right? The Pharisees' beliefs were so wrapped up in their personal desire that they found that it forced them to forsake what they ultimately held to be true, the ultimate code, the Shema. Right? And they ultimately forsook that and started pursuing what we would call things of selfish gain. That's their reality. And so in doing this, the religious leaders of their time, the pastors, the teachers, the Bible scholars, they deceived themselves and they also deceived thousands of other people simply because they were not willing to see the truth. And they weren't willing to move off of their fact that their worldview might not be true. Right? And so you've got to decide, again, if your opinions, if this basket was your worldview, if your opinions about the things in this basket are keeping you from seeing the truth, if your opinions about the things in this basket are keeping other people from seeing the truth, right? Folks, please, 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 please do not be a deceiver. Do not be someone who is so consumed by their own view that they can't even for a moment think that they might be wrong. And then use that opinion to lead other people astray. Use that opinion to drive other people away from God. Before you express your opinion about an issue, consider what you know to be true of God, and then examine your worldview through that lens. Right? These people, it's a struggle for us, and I fall into this category. It's a struggle for us to admit we're wrong, but the reality is that nobody knows everything. And so at some point, we've got to come to the conclusion that we may be wrong about something. So here's what I want to challenge you with for this week. Before you express an opinion, before you say something, ask yourself the question: does what I'm about to say have the ability to draw me closer to God? Am I building my own understanding of God? Does it have the ability to draw someone else who is around me closer to God? If you put it through that lens and it doesn't work out and you say, no, I don't think that this is appropriate, I don't think that this is the time, then hold back. Don't share it. But if you find that it does, by all means, let it go, right? Because that's our ultimate goal. We want to see people come to know who God is, because that is why Jesus died on the cross. Jesus endured all that pain on the cross. He endured that moment of separation from his Father so that we might have the opportunity to know the Father and to encourage others to know the Father. Number 2, the shrugger. Now, apart from, like we talked about, the blowers, the shruggers are the people who, just, like I said, just kind of go like this, right? They are the people who don't really have opinions. So listen closely to this. The only thing that's worse than deceiving another person is allowing yourself to be deceived because you're not willing to put in the effort to form an opinion. Right? Our opinions, strong or not, are a key part of helping us develop our belief, helping us develop our process, helping us come to understand who God is and how God works in our life. And so if you don't have any opinions on key issues, if you don't have any moral opinions about things, maybe some of the things that are in this basket, maybe some of the things that aren't, then my question to you is, what do you stand for? When I was growing up, I listened to this old country song, and that was the chorus of the song was basically, if you've got to stand for something, you've got to stand for something, or you'll end up falling for anything, right? So if you don't have an opinion, if you don't have convictions, my challenge to you this week is to find one thing that you think you might even be the slightest bit passionate about, and take the time to research it and develop a well-informed opinion. And then if you're feeling really, really, really super bold after that, and you feel like God's leading you to do so, share that opinion with someone else in hopes that it creates a relationship between you and God and that other person and God as well. Finally, number 3. So our final group, like I said, is the hopper. Now, before I get any farther into this, I want you to know there's nothing wrong with changing your mind if you come across a well-informed argument that convinces you that you might be wrong. Nothing wrong with that. It's healthy. It's called humility, right? And so that's not what I'm talking about right now, or what I'm about to talk about. What I am talking about is a personality where your opinion changes week to week based on what the current events are, what internet articles you read from an unverified source, and what quote you just saw from a celebrity on Twitter. Right? That's what I'm talking about. And so the deficiency with this type of worldview is that if you get into that and your opinion changes from week to week, people will no longer value your opinion because they know that it's rapidly going to change. Right? So what happens is if you change your opinion all the time, you start to lose credibility. And if you lose credibility, then you are not helping people understand who God is and how God works in their life. And in reality, you're robbing yourself of an opportunity to understand who God is. Excuse me. Right? And so if you don't have a set worldview on some of the key issues surrounding morality and faith, like the things that are in this basket, right? You've got to make a decision. And so my challenge for you this week is to identify one thing. Again, one thing. And to take a stance on that one thing, research it, develop it, and to take a stance on that one thing that lasts for 30 days. 1 month. Don't change your opinion. Don't alter it. Hold it for 30 days and see what happens. See how that impacts your relationship with others and your relationship with God. Now, I know that this is a lot simpler to say than it is to actually do it. It's just one of those things, sometimes the Bible is a lot easier to talk about than it is to follow through on. And so think of a house for me, okay? Everybody picture a house. So a house has lots of parts. It has a foundation, it has walls, it has a roof, has different bedrooms, staircases, things that happen in it, right? So think of your worldview as a house, right? So all of the different rooms inside the house are the different things that you believe in, right? But the one thing that stays consistent about that whole house is the foundation that the house is built on, okay? So you can take people in, you can show them all the different rooms, but whatever that foundation's built on, whatever that house is built on, that's what's coming up and seeping into the rest of the stuff. That's what's holding everything else up, okay? So if your worldview doesn't have Jesus at its foundation, right, then you've got to ask yourself what's holding everything else up. Could be facts, could be science, Could be lots of different things for you. I don't know. But the reality is, if we're going to stand here today and we're going to talk about Jesus and we're going to expose and expound opinions about faith and religion and morality, then Jesus has got to be the foundation of where we're at. Because if Jesus is the foundation, then anytime somebody comes to our house and we show them all the different rooms and we talk about all of this different stuff that's in our house, Jesus is going to be part of every conversation. He's going to be in everything because he's the foundation of where all that stuff comes from, right? And so your worldview should work that same way. It should be founded on the truth of Jesus and expand out from there. That way, no matter what your topic or opinion you find yourself expressing, the message of Christ is your foundation. And the message of Christ is always being shared. We all have a responsibility to be thinkers and influencers in the world we live in. That's why God made us the way he is, or the way we are. And we simply do not have the option to avoid communicating our core values, beliefs, and opinions. Some of the stuff in this basket is pretty divisive. It can keep us from engaging together. It can keep us from making friends with someone. It could keep us from even liking someone, right? Being friendly to someone. We don't have an option to not communicate our views. What we do have is an option in how we communicate those things. And we can choose to be deceivers, kind of like the Pharisees. We can choose to be passive. Or we can choose to be passionate about the most important thing. And that's Jesus. And the reality of what Jesus did that day on the cross when he uttered the words, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because it was in that moment that Jesus embraced your sin, he embraced my sin, and he embraced the sin of the entire world. And having never known separation from God, willingly embraced it so that you and I might have the opportunity to know God and to experience God in a very deep and relational way. Jesus equipped us to receive his grace, believe in his worldview, and commit to his movement. Imagine what our church would be like if we were all secure enough in our beliefs that we lived like Jesus. We believed in and held firm to a moral worldview. Not necessarily a popular worldview, but a moral one, right? But we freely dished out compassion to those who needed it. And we spoke with honesty and sincerity because we so valued the people around us. And we offered encouragement to everyone, even if we disagreed with them. If we could live simply with as little distortion as possible, think about how we could carry the message of Jesus out to a hurting world, to a neighborhood that so desperately needs to hear that there is someone here who cares about all people, right? I'm going to close with this quote. There's a rapper who is pretty popular in the Christian movement right now. His name is Lecrae, and he's somewhat popular because he served as kind of like a bridge between the majority white evangelical community and some of the black community, okay? And he wrote a book kind of about racial tension and racial ties and stuff like that. And this is what he said, and I think that this really helps put this in perspective for us. So rather than thinking about the world in the categories of simply good and evil, a biblical worldview helps us to think in the categories of good and redeemable. The rest of our opinions are important. But when faced with the shadow of the cross, they become invisible. Our opinions about this stuff are important. But the most important opinion we have is our opinion about the cross and our opinion about what Jesus did, because that is the foundation of our worldview. And so, in light of what Jesus did, what's your worldview? What challenges do you need to take on? What changes do you need to make to your own life? Where do you need to seek forgiveness? Who do you need to apologize to? Allow God to move in your heart as we engage in this last song. I'm going to pray real quick, and then I will turn it over. God, we offer this time up to you today. Pray that you would be with us, that you would guide us and protect us and love us, and help us to look to you. And help us to look to you as we seek to engage our neighborhood and our community and our culture. God, we offer this time up to you today. In your name we pray.